Shalom. Let me get straight into this lesson. But for truth's sake, this is how the Israelites looked, and this is how the Edomites looked. What you've been taught is a bunch of lies, and I'm gonna get into all this information. Got a lot to get to. So this is what you go to, Google, where you put in the J name and you put in the 12 disciples. This what comes up. Look at this. This what comes up. It's madness. So the so-called white man want to be us. He want to be Jacob. You know what I'm saying? He want to be Jacob, and Jacob got his name changed to Israel. So when I say Jacob, I'm talking about Israel. Yashar Allah, the people out of the Bible. That's how, these devils have hijacked our culture. They've hijacked our Bible. They've hijacked our history. And this is why the world is in great confusion. When you talk about the so-called people out of the Bible, this is what most people envision in their mind. Why is this? I'm going to get into this information that breaks this down. Let's go here. First Maccabees 1:1. It says, and it happened, and after Alexander, son of Philip, the Macedonian, which is the Edomite. So Alexander, I'm going to get into a lesson, Lord willing, tomorrow, going into the lineage of Alexander. He was an Edomite, son of Philip, the Macedonian, who came out of the land of Chittim and had smitten Darius, king of the Persians. And Medes is going back into the book of Daniel, talking about the next succession of a kingdom, which would be the Greeks. And the Greeks were Edomites. And that he reigned in his stead the first over Greece. So go to 7. So Alexander reigned 12 years and then he died. Right, so this was the Greek Empire. I just want you to see that. So let's go to First Maccabees 3:48 to put this in proper context. Matter of fact, I'm going to jump up on 3:48. I'm going to start 3:46. First Maccabees 3:46. It says, wherefore the Israelites assembled themselves together and came to Maspah and over against Jerusalem, for Maspah was the place where they prayed aforetime in Israel. 47. Then they fasted the day and put on sackcloth and cast ashes upon their heads and rent their clothes. You see them doing that madness with what's that? Lent. You people out your fucking mind. 48. And laid open the book of the law, wherein the heathen, who was the ruling empire at this time, it was the Greeks, which were Edomites. So this heathen is talking about the Edomites and the other surrounding nations, but primarily the so-called white people, where the heathen has sought to paint the likeness of their images. So okay, this is nothing new. So they did this, and throughout the history, the biblical artwork. Look at this perversion, and most of the time they draw these fake biblical characters in nude to show you how sick and twisted this demon is, man. These Edomites. Look at this. This is all blasphemy, and it's all lies right here. This is a total whitewash of history. And you see this? This has saturated the minds of our people. So let's go here. Biblical movies. So the artwork, the movies, the media, the billboards, all this ties into this witchcraft. Look at this. All these biblical movies, when these people in actuality were so-called black people, the so-called white man and his media machine, his society, right, the powers that be, right, they set this whole agenda up to whitewash everything in history. So when our people would read the Bible, they'll see these images in their mind. All these images, right, these movies, there's witchcraft on your mind. Look at Solomon, Mary, Samson. They whitewashed everything. Jeremiah. They make you want to throw up, man. Paul. Look at this shit, man. All this paraphernalia. Judas, Saul, which is Paul. They got Yahweh shot. And this adds to the witchcraft on the people's mind. But in actuality, how the true Israelites looked were they were so-called black people. As you know today. Let me let this load up. This will be more aesthetically correct. You see these, let Let's go here. So we know at the time of the Maccabees, right, the Greek Empire was in power, and there was, if I'm not mistaken, Antiochus. Um, right here, this the guy that played Yahweh Shah in the movie. So I advise you to watch this movie, The Book of Clarence, so you can get a visual of really how things looked at this time, you know, between 1 AD to 70 AD, you know, in between that time frame, so you can have an idea that the Israelites were so-called black people. And you see, you know, Yahweh Shah will be a so-called black man. The disciples were so-called black men, apostles, right, so on and so forth, right? You go here, the people of that time of Judea, the Judeans, so-called Jews, were so-called black people. This is accurate right here. This is accurate. You go here. So this movie gives you a glimpse into that time frame. So they weren't so-called white people. So let me get into this article. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go into the impact of what this has done to your mind, what this has done to your perception, how you see the Bible. So they totally indoctrinated you and brainwashed you in every aspect of the Bible. That's why when Jake read the book of Genesis, they envision a fucking snake in their mind, because that's all they've been shown in the movies and through the artwork. Let's get into this, man. It's a heavy information I'm about to go into, because it's going to get the framework of the psyche of the mind of how these people think. You know, even some of you people that might be waking up, you got this stuff on you, man. It says art and movies. It says art and movies have a significant, let me read this again. It says art and movies have had a significant influence on how people perceive the Bible. Do you hear this? This is very important information that you need to focus in on. Lock in, Jake. It says often shaping interpretations. That's why when we tell you a fucking snake in a garden and they had so-called Adam and Eve as so-called two white people naked, that's what Jake's seeing in their mind. They ain't how it was. All that's false. But this is how you understand the Bible from what you've been taught. It says, let me read this again. Art and movies have had a significant influence on how people perceive the Bible, often shaping interpretations, emphasizing certain themes, and even redefining cultural understandings of biblical stories. Do you hear this? Visual interpretation of biblical stories. So they gave you all this shit in Sunday school, in the church system, through the television, cartoons. You've been indoctrinated. You messed up, man. The people that haven't been woken up. You brothers and you sisters that already know what time it is, you get it. It says visual interpretation of biblical stories. Art, particularly paintings, you hear this? And sculptures, has played a crucial role in visualizing and popularizing biblical stories. That's heavy. It says Renaissance artists like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raphael. That's how you get the movie Ninja Turtles, because they named them after these Renaissance painters, which were all Edomites, and they aided in this deception and this witchcraft. It says, and Raphael created iconic images of biblical figures, such as the Last Supper or the creation of Adam, which became embedded in popular culture. This in your mama mind. This is your grandma mind, your uncle, your auntie, your girlfriend. You know what I'm saying? Your best friend. This is what they see in their mind. We're going into the deep dive of this, man. It says, which became embedded in popular culture. It's been embedded in the people's minds. These works often served as visual aids for those who couldn't read the image of so-called white Jesus. They showed that image to the slaves and to the so-called Native Americans to indoctrinate them. It says, communicating religious ideas and moral lessons in a way that was accessible to a wide audience. 2, emotional connection. Art, both traditionally and modern, has helped people form emotional connections with biblical narratives. All this shit you've been taught is a fucking lie. You've been brainwashed. You've been indoctrinated with this damn artwork and these movies and these sayings that you say. Paintings, music. A lot of this sayings come from music, so-called gospel music. It says in later films, often highlight the dramatic and emotional aspects of stories like Passion of the Christ, which they showed you Mel Gibson playing I think he played that role, if I'm not mistaken. But you get, I think he directed or he played the role. But he played Yahweh Shah, the Messiah is a so-called white man. That's that witchcraft using Hollywood. When you go into the word Hollywood, it was a tree that they used, holly tree, to cast spells on the people's minds. That's what Hollywood is set up to do. This emotional portrayal can resonate deeply with individuals, shaping their personal interpretations of faith and scripture. That's heavy. 3. Hollywood and modern interpretations. It says in the 20th and 21st centuries, Hollywood movies such as the Ten Commandments and the Passion of Christ have brought biblical stories to life for mass audiences. These films often take creative liberties, emphasizing certain elements of dramatic effect or to resonate with contemporary issues. They indoctrination movies. Let's keep going. For example, Mel Gibson, The Passion of the Christ, heavily focused on the brutality of they got the J word, but his true name was Yahweh Shah. He was a so-called black man. Crucifixion, bringing attention to the themes of suffering and redemption, which sparked intense debate about the portrayal of violence in relation to so-called Christian teachings. But this Israelite teachings, there ain't no such thing as Christians. That's newspeak. It says thematic focus on reinterpretation. It says films like Noah, which was a whitewash movie, Exodus, whitewash, Gods and Kings, reframe biblical stories. Do you hear this? They gave you narratives. They gave you the storylines. They gave you the visuals. All that has messed your mind up with modern sensibilities, which may cause audiences to question traditional interpretations. The portrayal of Noah as a flawed character in Darren's Noah, for instance, sparked conversations about human nature, environmentalism, and divine justice in ways that a more traditional biblical. So these movies are enchantments. It says cultural and historical context. Movies and artwork often provide new layers of cultural and historical context that influence how people understand biblical texts. For instance, films or books that explore the historical background in biblical times can give viewers a sense of social, political, religious environment in which the Bible was written, which these all indoctrination movies, man. That's why they got this new shit on Netflix, these new biblical movies to push it more. This can lead to a deeper understanding of the text itself, as well as how it has been interpreted over centuries. 6. The power of symbolism. Many artists and filmmakers rely on biblical symbolisms to convey moral or spiritual messages. Let's go here. I'm gonna close it out at the bottom. Matter of fact, it says, for example, symbols such as the lamb, the serpent, or the cross are often used in art and film to convey complex theological ideas, which that's all. The cross is a pagan symbol. You people think, that's outside the truth, think it's a goddamn serpent, a literal serpent in the garden. No, that was a man. The use of such symbols in art and cinema can reinforce the Bible's impact on culture. You hear this? They telling you they fucking brainwashing you. You know what I'm saying? They telling you what they doing. It says in Psalm, art and movies continue to shape how people view the Bible, both by highlighting its narrative power and by introducing new interpretations. Man, that's heavy. I ain't got to read no more. Hopefully this lesson has been edifying. Call Hala Yahweh, Bahashim, Yahweh Shai, Bahashim, Rachat Kodash. Shalom.